My name's Jane MacMaster and I'll be hosting this session, which I'm absolutely thrilled about and have been very much looking forward to it. I studied at the University of Sydney from 1990 to 1993 and qualified with a degree in mechanical engineering. Before we begin, I too would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we're meeting today and pay my respects to their elders past and present. Well, it's been a wonderful morning and we've got many more events that go on into the afternoon, but I have to admit, I have been especially looking forward to this event. It's not every day that you get to meet an astronaut, let alone an Australian astronaut. I first met Katherine in 2022. We were both attending a Women in STEM dinner. I was Chief Engineer at Engineers Australia at the time, and Katherine was working for the Australian Space Agency of Director of Technology. We sat next to each other at the dinner and we had a great conversation about many things, including something that we're both quite passionate about, and that's encouraging more young Australians to choose engineering and a career in STEM. I had no idea at the time, not a single inkling, that she was going to become Australia's first astronaut trained under the Australian flag. And when I found out some months later that she had been accepted into the training, my very first thought was, for someone who has such stellar capabilities and who is about to embark on such a high-flying career, she was an incredibly down-to-earth person, very humble, and a genuinely lovely person. So what an opportunity it is for us to be able to chat with her today. So without any more ado and without wasting a moment more, I would like to welcome to the stage Australia's first astronaut trained under the Australian flag, Australia's first woman astronaut, Katherine Bennell-Pegg. Katherine, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate your time. We've got so much that we could talk about, but do you know what? I thought we should jump straight into the most fascinating and exciting part. We just want to hear what it's like being an astronaut. Can you tell us a little bit about the training? It's been quite recent. Can you tell us where you did that, a little bit about it, what you enjoyed about it?
Absolutely, and hi everyone, thanks for coming today. It's wonderful to be back here at Sydney Uni. Becoming an astronaut is more wonderful than I had ever dreamed, even though it was a childhood dream since I was a child. Being an astronaut means that you get to work with a team of astronauts from a team of nations preparing to go forward, to use space and explore space, to make new discoveries and to help humanity benefit from all the research that's done up there. And you do that as a representative of your nation. So when you're up there, you're just the visible tip of the iceberg of an incredible ecosystem of researchers and educators and people of almost any kind of career you can imagine on the ground. That said, it's extremely intense being an astronaut, but also worthwhile. So I just did what's called basic astronaut training, or ASCAN training, with the European Space Agency. Now, basic astronaut training is what any government professional astronaut has to do after they're selected. And selection itself was a year-and-a-half adventure. But once you're selected, you can't call yourself an astronaut right away. You have to do this training, which typically takes between 1 and 2 years. It's the same curriculum for all International Space Station, ISS, partner nations. So that's NASA, the Canadian Space Agency, Japanese Space Agency, the 22 countries of the European Space Agency, and Russia. We all have to have that same box ticked. And in this training, for the Europeans, where I did it, it was held based in Germany, in Cologne, at the European Astronaut Centre, the home of Europe's astronauts. But we travelled all over Europe and all over the world for it. And because the role of an astronaut today is so diverse and far-reaching compared to what it is traditionally, the training is also really broad. So astronauts today aren't just pilots and operators. We're also scientists in the sky, the hands, the eyes and the ears of our country's researchers on the ground that have often spent decades preparing their science and their research. We are medical test subjects, for want of a better word. So we learn how to do medical procedures on ourselves and on each other. We used augmented reality to learn about the body really quickly and then do some basic procedures. We also learn how to live in space. So we do that through getting lessons from other astronauts, particularly human behaviour and performance training, because up there your lives rely on each other and you have to learn about how to work well in a team in a confined, isolated, extreme environment. You learn about how to fix the space station and the capsules, right? There's no gyms come fix an ISS. You have to look after the plumbing and the wiring and cleaning filters and the maintenance. We learn how to do spacewalks by doing diving in deep pools underwater with all the tools in pairs with mission control in our ear, because underwater is the most representative environment for long-term zero-G you can get on Earth. But because being underwater, water has weight, right? It's heavy, it slows your movements. You need to train in zero-G without that effect. So we also do what's called parabolic flights or vomit comets. And in that, the plane flies in a parabola like this. And just like when you release a ball, when you throw it, you fly free inside the plane, right? And so you're sitting there and the floor falls away and you lift up and so does your smile and it stays up there for the whole flight. And you have to learn that you can move yourself with the push of a pinky finger. You get this urge to swim and kick when your body's not touching anything. It's really deep within you and you have to fight it because your mate's face might be near your feet or a piece of equipment. And up there we do things like CPR, doing a handstand on the person and squats on the roof, because otherwise you'd fly back. Learn to use a drill by holding on. So you don't spin too, which looks a bit ridiculous from the ground. We learn how to operate the large, huge, beautiful robotic arm on the space station. We learn how our bodies respond to low pressure and low oxygen environments. We do expeditions, winter survival, ocean survival, rescue, and many, many more things. Even space history, law policy, the list goes on. So it was a wild 13 months, 323 instructors.
Months. Yeah. Wow. I mean, it just sounds like such a vast quantum of things that you need to learn about. And I want to explore that more, but I've just noticed this picture that's up here. Can you talk us through who this group of people is?
Yeah, so that group of us is called the Hoppers. That's the patch I wear on my right arm here. That's my astronaut class. When you train as an astronaut, usually you go through with a class that goes through the same selection as you. So they're 5 European Space Agency astronauts, and we all come from totally different backgrounds, because to become an astronaut, it's actually just like the icing on the cake of a STEM career you love anyway. So you can be a scientist, you can be an engineer, you can be a doctor, you can be a pilot. So there we've got, Sophie from France, who's a helicopter test pilot, first woman in France to do that. Pablo from Spain, who's an aeronautical engineer. Rose from the UK, she's an astrophysicist, a naval reservist. Raphael from Belgium, who is a neuroscientist and hot air balloon pilot. And Marco from Switzerland, who's a doctor and helicopter rescue doctor as well. So amazing people, and we go through the training together, and it's an incredible environment. I was really surprised actually that there was no real culture of competition. It was all about collaboration. The mission order is about whose country wants to fly and when. So we all have totally different strengths and weaknesses and help each other through.
It's just fascinating. You mentioned the parabolic flights and how difficult it was to train yourself, or how much you had to concentrate to remind yourself to push yourself only with a slight movement of your finger. It sounds like a good recipe for something going wrong, especially the first times you've done it. Can you walk us through any element of the training that was the most surprising, perhaps? What was the most surprising part of training to be an astronaut?
The most surprising part, I think, was that level of camaraderie. I thought that there would be competition, but it was really a wonderful team atmosphere. Also, the fact that we also were learning about space art, and we learned photography, and we had to learn a whole host of topics that people might not think is part of being an astronaut, because astronauts today also act as diplomats for their nation on the world stage and to showcase what their country is capable of. Okay. But yeah, there were some wonderful moments though on the training. I remember during winter survival, and I don't like the cold, so I had been a bit concerned about winter survival, but it was fine. And we'd been, rescuing each other out of icy lakes and things like that all day, and then we had to spend time out in the forest by ourselves, far from each other. And one of the nights when we weren't allowed to watch or any kind of electronics, I remember waking up in the middle of the night and sticking my head out of the snow cave, and the stars were so bright. And I used to love looking up at the stars as a kid. I found them mesmerising. And then I saw the International Space Station going overhead, and it was a month before graduation. It was the last course we had to pass before, and to know that I was about to be mission ready to go up there was pretty special.
That is quite special, isn't it? What a coincidence that it went past just then. Okay, and what about maybe the most difficult or perhaps even the scariest element of the training? I assume it wasn't all easy. In fact, I'm sure it was all quite challenging.
The hardest part of the training for me had to be learning Russian. I knew it would be the hardest for me going into it. So I just put in effort from day one. We had a really intensive course. It was 8 weeks of lessons, so 2 weeks a month for 4 months, with other topics being done, other exams in the other 2 weeks a month. And we had to get from alphabet to advanced, so professional proficiency. And I was a bit worried about that. That was kind of the mountain to climb in my mind to pass astronaut training, because not everyone passes. And it's only once you pass that you're mission assignment ready, or that you are an astronaut. So I just put in effort from day one, and I think it just goes to show that, even on astronaut training, effort is more important than talent, because I got through it in the end, thank goodness.
Yeah, it feels like you've done about 50 university degrees in 13 months, to be honest.
You're sentenced to learn, but I love ideas and I love learning, so that was great.
Yeah, amazing. So can you walk us through a little bit on what there's probably no typical day in space, but can you talk us through what some activities out in space you might typically do on any given day? Do you sleep at night? Do you sleep at regular times? How does that even work? Is breakfast still a thing?
Yeah, so we have all the same needs in space we have on Earth, but the way we fulfill them can be quite different. So the home of most astronauts today in space is the International Space Station. To contextualise it, it is huge. It's about the size of a soccer field, 109 metres across. The internal parts of it that have air, they look kind of like a bus or a caravan on the inside, right? And there is enough volume in there that it's about the same volume as the inside of an A380, the passenger part, or a 5-bedroom house. There's a gym in there, there's 2 bathrooms, there is 2 kitchens and places to eat, there are sleeping pods where you sleep, and most of it is big, beautiful scientific facilities. And so a typical day, every day up there, is extremely tightly scheduled in 5-minute increments, and there's a huge process, thousands of people behind all the planning and operations on the ground for the astronauts in space, typically 7, for example, but it does go up and down. You'll probably wake up about 6 o'clock, you're on GMT time, and then you have to get ready for the day, just like you do on Earth. And the way mission control knows the astronauts are awake, because the cameras will be off, is they see the toilet flush counter going off. And then there's no showers or baths up there, so you have like a special kind of shampoo that you can just towel off. You brush your teeth, usually with toothpaste you can swallow, and you can get clean with sort of like a disposable wet wipe or a cloth situation. You'll be wearing the same clothes as yesterday. You usually wear the same clothes all week, except you have one set for exercise and one for work. And once you're ready for the day, you'll all come together and usually eat some breakfast. Now, space food is not entirely the same as on Earth, but you can eat up there anything that doesn't make crumbs, because if there's crumbs, it kind of gets in people's eyes or behind buttons. It's pretty bad. So even salt and pepper is in liquid form. And there's not really fresh fruit up there unless it's a special delivery like Christmas or something. You get an orange and everyone's excited. And you crave salty and spicy food because you feel a bit stuffed up from the fluid shifts in your body. After breakfast, there'll usually be a planning conference about 7:30 in the morning where people from the mission controls around the world all get on, and you all make sure you know what's happening that day. All the science experiments you might be doing, or maybe you're planning for a spacewalk, which would take all day, or a new vehicle docking or undocking. But say your day is experiment focused, you'll be getting out and doing that, and there would be a ground controller, a Capcom or a Eurocom or a JCOM, the person in mission control that talks to the astronaut, there to support you. You'd work, you'd have a short lunch break, and sometime in the day you'd be scheduled for 2.5 hours of exercise. You have to do exercise. There's a treadmill, there's a bike, there's a weights machine. You have to do it, because if you don't use your muscles and bones up there, you lose them.
Can you choose what exercise you do?
No. It's very prescribed, but it's also a nice way to keep mentally healthy up there, to do that exercise. And astronauts will often, watch some TV or something to relax at the same time. After work, it's usually dinner, 7:30 p.m, and you'll have a meal together, share stories about the day, and after dinner, a lot of people will do maybe extra calls to schools or call their family. A lot of astronauts take photos out the big cupola on the bottom, which is like an igloo, sort of make it of windows, and maybe play games, there's card games, and go to bed. Friday night's a movie night. Saturday is cleaning day. Sunday is a day off, but usually you're in catch-up mode. And it's important astronauts up there do take that time to relax, because a mission's typically half a year, so you need to have that relaxation. Where you go to sleep, if you're up there for more than a month, is kind of like the size of a phone booth, an old school phone booth with white padding, and your sleeping bag is like an armless bag velcroed to the wall. And astronauts don't have that effect of like a weighted blanket, so some really struggle to fall asleep, so they'll have elastics to tighten around themselves.
I mean, it's absolutely fascinating. There's another photo up on the screen. Can you walk us through what this is?
Yeah, so that's when I was in Houston for training. So the US astronaut training mostly occurs in Houston. And I was at a company called Collins, which makes a lot of the spacesuits. And this was their prototype lunar suit, one of 2 prototypes at the time that I got to try on different parts of. And it was very exciting. I got coached through it by a NASA astronaut. Moving in those suits is really tough. The joints don't always line up with your body. You don't have a great field of vision, but this one was seeking to improve on that. You can see underneath the torso, as I was getting ready, it's like a tighter garment that's full of fluid loops to keep you not too hot, not too cold when you're in space. And particularly when people go back to the moon, thermal regulation will be a big challenge. You can have your foot in the shadow and your knee in the sun, and there could be a 300-degree temperature difference between the two. So it's very exciting engineering that goes into these suits. They're a human-shaped spacecraft.
Yeah, that's incredible. I should have said also that we will have time at the end for audience Q&A. So if you've got a question for Katherine, we'll have a couple of roaming mics going around at the end. We could talk about life in space all day, but I want to actually now turn to your journey, Katherine, as a young person. And I read your bio throughout the week, and it's very impressive. And I think I read that from at least as early as high school, you knew that you wanted to be an astronaut. And you've already mentioned that the stars mesmerised you from an early age. When did being an astronaut become a dream, and when did it become actually quite a realistic possibility?
Yeah, so for me, it is almost as long ago as I can remember. I had the dream to be an astronaut. I think a lot of young people do around the world. In Australia, 7 out of 10 kids under 12 want to be astronauts, which is phenomenal, actually. So I shared that dream with them, and it's that same urge you have, to look under a rock and see if there's a bug, or to climb a tree, that same feeling you get when you look out at the horizon at a beautiful sunset or from a mountaintop. That feeling is what has led humans to explore our planet, to want to understand it, and also to want to explore and understand space. But as I grew up, that desire for adventure, wanting to walk on planets no one had ever walked on, as a young kid, that grew into fascination for science. I wanted to be part of teams that made concrete leaps forward in discovery of concrete human knowledge. And that was around high school. I loved reading science magazines. I loved doing aerobatic flying. I loved having a telescope. And I remember when my school said, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" I was like, "Well, an astronaut, of course. What else is there?" They asked us for 3 options, and I refused to give more than that. But instead of laughing at me, they said, well, go figure out what that would take. And that's when I learned, as I said before, you can have a career in any STEM field first, a career you love anyway. On top of that, you should have expeditionary experience, things like being in the military or exploring Antarctica. You should have operational experiences like flying or scuba diving, anything kind of hands-on that could be critical to life in that moment. So say being a surgeon, for example, would fall under that too, or being in emergency services. And you should live internationally at some point. It's an international world space up there and on Earth. And that all sounded pretty fantastic. So in the end, I decided to apply to study physics and engineering at uni. And that was the start of an incredible adventure, a space engineering career of a decade across 6 different countries. And I truly loved it. And the astronaut dream was always in the back of my mind, but I knew how unlikely it was. Australia didn't have a space agency, let alone an astronaut program. I figured even to join space, I had to leave Australia to go overseas. And so I was really focused on the space engineering career. And it wasn't until 2021 that the European Space Agency opened a call for astronauts. That was the first call I was ever eligible to apply for. And I was so excited, and so was everyone I knew, to finally have our chance to apply. I was eligible through my British passport. And I never believed I'd be the one to get through. In fact, none of the 6 of us hoppers did, but we all wanted to give it a crack and see how far we got. Just to be eligible was amazing. And I think it wasn't until I was at the European Astronaut Centre, walking through the front doors, being greeted by astronauts whose biographies I'd been speed reading during the selection as peers, that I was like, wow, this is real, right? It was, yeah.
That is amazing. I mean, you sound like you're a very, very curious person and also very committed and very determined. And you've spoken quite a lot about how the natural world has inspired you from since a young age. Has there been any person in particular who's inspired you along the way, or group of people?
I think I've taken inspiration from a lot of different people. I've been fortunate that, when I was young, my parents were very encouraging. And as I grew up, I had lots of mentors through different parts of my work life. I won't call anyone specific out because I'd leave out so many, but I'm really grateful for the different guidance I've got. I do remember as a kid, like many of you in the audience today, sitting in the audience listening to Paul Scully-Powell or Andy Thomas speak to Australians that went to space before as astronauts, and it's really wonderful to be doing that full circle now, and I'm keen to pay that forward.
That's great. I mean, you're lucky in a way that you've had a dream. I wouldn't say that I've ever had a dream, but I have loved my career as an engineer. I've never really had a plan. I've just really followed the opportunity, the most interesting opportunity in front of me at any one time. I wonder if you have any advice both for people who have a dream and a plan, but also for those people who don't have a plan necessarily and are just happy to see what is in front of them at any point in time. Have you got any tips or advice for either groups of people about how to shape or forge a fulfilling career?
Absolutely. So I can tell you that about half of my astronaut class had the childhood dream and half decided very close to selection or when they saw the ad, right? So opportunities can come from anywhere. I would definitely say what you did, follow the opportunities, create your own opportunities is good advice. Even if you have a dream, you don't want to be too prescriptive because you don't know all the ways you can get there. For people that are, wanting to have a fulfilling career, my advice would be to be purpose-driven. Don't dream about wanting to be something. Dream about what you want to contribute, what problems you want to help solve. Young people that are in the workforce or even in the early stages of uni today, they'll still be working 55 years from now, right? 55 years ago, people were walking on the moon. How could they imagine the world we'd have today, the opportunities we'd have today? They couldn't have, right? They didn't even have the internet back then, Post-it notes or 3D printers, nothing like that. So 55 years from now, people can plan to say, what do I want to contribute? What problems do I want to help solve? What do I want to discover? And you can have a North Star, but keep your eyes open on the way there. And the way you keep your eyes open is by reading widely and exposing yourself to a lot of experiences. I mean, even for me, it may seem like I've been very prescriptive, but I've taken lots of twists and turns, and actually having a breadth of experience helps you to be more effective. You see connections others don't. When I did my master's thesis at the European Space Agency, I was in the thermal engineering department working on a beautiful space lidar. I thought I loved thermal engineering, but after 5 months of analysis, I was like, no, I need people, I need dynamism, I want to be at the cutting edge of the next step. And next to me was the advanced concepts team and the concurrent design facility, where it's sort of like a sports competition to rapidly come up with new satellite and mission designs. And so I was like, that's what I want to do. And I turned left. And yeah, keeping your eyes open and then backing yourself to take opportunities, even if they scare you, is important, because everyone's capable of more than they imagine themselves to be.
I really love that advice about thinking about how you want to make a positive difference to the world and being purpose-driven. And we're going to come back to how we can encourage more young Australians to follow a career in STEM and in particular engineering, because we have a huge shortage of engineers in the country at the moment. But I did want to, before we go there, just have a quick chat about work-life balance. The training itself for 13 months sounds very gruelling. I know that you've been on a fairly intense outreach program of events since you've been back in Australia. That must be exhausting. Can you talk to us about how you maintain your work-life balance?
A lot of coffee. I think that it's an evolving challenge that I think everyone faces in their own way. One of the things that I really enjoyed on astronaut training was the human behaviour and performance module. There's a human behaviour and performance framework for astronauts. You can Google it, the ISS HBP model. You get an old version, but it's still relevant. And one of the key components of being a performant astronaut is to have self-care. And that is a measure of your performance. Like, if you are burning yourself out, you are underperforming as a metric, and it is your responsibility to call that. So it's that philosophy of making sure you're rested enough to work well and work safely, rather than thinking if you deserve to rest or not. And that's something I have to be actively conscious of. When you really love what you do, when you believe in the goal of what you do, you have to catch yourself. I think since becoming a parent, I've got 2 kids at primary school, I got better at that, right? Because it's not just me that I would be sacrificing. And I got some great advice when I was pregnant with my first kid. There was one other woman on the side of thousands of engineers with me that was a young mother, and she said to me, proactively draw your own boundaries. And people usually follow them. Simple things like block out your calendar from whenever you want to leave to get your kids to when they're in bed. And people don't put meetings in it. But if you leave it open and you have to say no a million times every day, people get annoyed and you feel guilty. So that proactively setting your boundaries and knowing people will follow them was simple but great advice for me.
Wonderful. All right. I now want to talk about something that we both have a lot of time and passion for, and that's inspiring the next generation to consider a career in STEM, and within that, a career in engineering, and within that, possibly even a career in space. As I said before, we have a shortage of engineers in Australia, and Australia produces the second lowest proportion of graduates who are engineers in the OECD, at just 8% of graduates. And only 2.8% of the engineering workforce in Australia are Australian-born women. So we need to inspire and open more young Australians' eyes to the prospect and the opportunities that an engineering career and a career in space, how that can unfold, and how rewarding and fulfilling those sorts of careers can be. Katherine, do you have any insights as to why those numbers are so low, a low number of graduates in engineering and low numbers of women in particular in engineering?
I think engineering has a problem of people not knowing what it is. When I was at high school, even though I loved space as a topic and I loved science and I loved flying, I didn't really know what engineering was beyond the definition of the term, but I applied to have a double degree with science and engineering because the engineering degree had space in the title. And I knew a lot of astronauts were engineers, and I thought it would round out the physics education. And I did not fit the stereotype at all, right? I'd never written a line of code. I'd never used a drill. I did not look like a stereotypical engineer, and so it was just that purpose-driven approach that helped me get through the slog of the first year or so until I had the confidence to be like, no, I belong. And I think that at various stages in the pipe, there's different challenges, but the first one is even knowing what an engineer does, and then also knowing that not fitting perhaps what a stereotype of an engineer is means you bring more value to the discussion. I think that's a challenge. So having stories of engineers and what they're doing and what the joy of an engineering career is can be really helpful for young people.
Yeah, I think that's one of the challenges our profession faces, because it's such a diverse and broad profession, it's very hard to describe. And Engineers Australia did some research a few years ago and interviewed hundreds of women who didn't choose engineering, women who had studied law and economics and medicine and architecture and other careers. And 90% of those women said that they barely considered engineering or didn't consider engineering at all. And the most commonly cited reason was, as you were saying, just a lack of understanding of what engineering is and what engineers actually do day to day. So perhaps we can have a chat about careers in space. Let's take the context of space. Let's talk about some of the fulfilling jobs that there are in space, either as an astronaut, but as we know, there are many, many jobs on Earth that support the space industry. What is it about jobs in space? Why is that so fulfilling? What are the impacts of working in the space sector?
Well, basically, to have a job in space today in Australia, there are good jobs in every state and territory, including many regional or remote areas, which is absolutely brilliant. It wasn't the case 20 years ago. We now have an Australian Space Agency, just 6 years old, but emerging, tailored for this more commercial space era, which is great. And so globally in the space industry, if you kind of take any job and put the word space in front of it, it's pretty much a space job. Just at the Astronaut Centre, we had space nutritionists, space fitness instructors, people that stitch spacesuits in our clothing. You have people that drive the trucks with the rockets on the back. You have the technicians that do, you know, the welding of all the ground support equipment. The list goes on and on. We have space artists, space educators, space poets, space historians. So if people are interested in space and want to work there, they can. And I think a lot of people like working in space, not for the so-called glory of it, but because it critically underpins life on Earth. That's not something I had realised till I got into the space sector, that space is more than about, you know, groundbreaking discoveries of pure science or exploration, although those absolutely have value. It's directly underpinning our life on Earth in ways that most people don't know, which itself creates a vulnerability. I mean, space ultimately is just a place, right? It's like the ocean. And like the ocean, it has breadth of activity in it. So space is a place that's the ultimate high ground. From up there, you can see phenomenon around the world, which means people have used their ingenuity to use it to identify hotspots for modern slavery or illegal fishing, or to get food drops where refugees are moving. From up there, you can identify bushfires and floods. What you can see from up there, you can connect remote communities or remote industries. And what you can connect, you can inform, like GPS, to do really high precision farming. And even on the International Space Station, which may from the outset look perhaps like one of the most luxurious or niche areas of space, it's actually, I think, the broadest because of the human element and the amount of research we can do up there. I was blown away with the breadth of sciences that are involved in space, because when you remove the gravity vector, you basically get really amazing effects. Crystals grow larger and more pure. So you have protein crystals, which affect drugs into, say, Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. You have metal crystals for forming new alloys. You can look at home insulation, for example, by looking at bubbling. You can look at industrial processes like fluid mixing and metal foams. The list goes on. And people, I think, are liking to work in space because they feel they're going to make a difference, and they can.
What an amazing array of reasons to work in space. I want to start a couple of questions now about our kids, who are both in the audience and who are in all the Australian schools across our country. And let's start with our perhaps later primary school kids or high school kids. I was wondering whether you've got any advice for those students who may be considering a career or further study down the track in some sort of STEM field. Have you got any advice on what sort of subjects they may choose to study at school to help get them on that track?
First of all, I'd say, if you're interested in a STEM field, you should absolutely pursue your passion without hesitation, without reflecting on whether you think you're good enough or if you think you fit a stereotype, because if you find something you like, you will become good at it. Of course, to have a STEM career, it's important to do solid subjects in high school. Maths and the right kind of sciences are absolutely necessary. Don't just go for the subjects that get you the best high school mark. Go for the ones that will prepare you for the future as well. You know, when you're looking to have a STEM career, there's so many types. Like, even when you find a niche, there's many things you can do within it. It's amazing. But I think generally in Australia, we're really good at backing ourselves on the sports field, even if we're the weakest in the team, right? Like, kids will lean in, adults will lean in and give it a go for the love of the team, for the love of the sport and the experience. But when it comes to more academic pursuits, many people, if they're not near the top of the class, they lean out and they're like, oh, this is not for me, I'm not capable. We need to change that conversation a little bit, because like I said, you become good at it. So if it's something you enjoy, you can pursue it, and with effort and time, you can learn anything.
And it feels less like hard work when you're enjoying it. So let's now talk about the younger children in Australia. There's lots of people in the room who are, I presume, mums, dads, aunties, uncles, grandparents, and so forth. Have you got any advice for all of us to help our young people keep a career in STEM on the radar, on the table? Any advice on how we can have a conversation around the dinner table about careers in STEM? What can we as the grown-ups do to help encourage our younger Australians to think about a career in STEM?
Yeah, I mean, you build up their confidence, of course, expose people to a lot of experiences. You know, work experience in high school or university are incredibly powerful. I did my Year 10 work experience at Parkes Radio Observatory, which made me see to work in space you didn't have to be a superhero. It was very normal people. You know, at university I did a lot of internships which exposed me to different parts of space where I saw what interested me the most. As simple as, you know, giving kids access to science books and science magazines where they can read about lots of different things that might pique their interest. For me, at high school, having a pair of binoculars and then an amateur telescope to look at the sky myself, and learning to fly, and there's a lot of ways kids can learn to fly these days that are cost effective, like Air Cadets. That turned the science classroom and the maths classroom to me into tools to do my hobbies better. So just encouraging those pursuits is really helpful.
Yeah, and I guess as of the last couple of days, it's probably not the best advice to ask young kids to follow social media channels, but there are some wonderful science and engineering-based channels on YouTube. Mark Rober, who I think is based in the US at the moment, has some amazing videos and resources and even kits that they can send out, and just a whole plethora of other YouTube channels based on engineering and science as well. And this is a bit of an unprepared question, but do you have any favourites, Katherine? Do you know of any? Are you familiar with Mark Rober, for example?
I haven't had much time to watch lots of things, but I do agree with you that exposing people to that is fantastic. You know, there's great documentaries out there, particularly the ones that use visual imagery to show the scale of the universe. That just blows people's minds, right? And anything that shows the scale of the universe, from the atom to the edge of the universe, you know, that really makes you feel small and have that feeling of wonder. And I'd always also encourage people to help young people to do project-based work where you get to try and fail and actually achieve it yourself. Like, I know that when I moved from answering questions that were already answered in the back of a textbook to being able to do my own research and my own projects, that's when I started to love engineering. Before that, for me, it was a bit of a slog, to be honest.
Right, okay, fascinating. It's nearly time for audience Q&A, so I hope you've got some questions ready for Katherine. But we're going to do a little bit of a fun activity before we move to that, and we're going to have some space trivia. So I'm going to ask for a bit of audience interaction here and ask for you to raise your hand when you think you've got the right answer, and then Katherine's actually going to give us the right answer. So the first question is, what percentage of climate and environment data that we use on Earth comes from space? Now, the three possible answers are less than 10%, around 50%, or around 90%, or around that area. So put your hands up if you think it's less than 10%. A couple of people, all right, around half the climate environment data, yep. And what about 90%-ish, quite a lot amount? Okay, interesting. There's a favourite there, Katherine?
It's 99% of environmental data, like climate data, comes from space. 1% comes from Earth-based ground truthing of that data and augmenting data. An important 1%, but there's 55 essential climate variables we have to monitor internationally for climate change.
55?
55, and more than half of those can only come from space in a precise and continuous manner.
That's absolutely fascinating, isn't it? Okay, well, a very well-informed audience. Question number 2, what percentage of astronauts who've been to space have been women? So your first option is around 5% of astronauts who've been to space are women. Around 20% is your second option, and around 50%. Okay, hands up for around 5%. Okay, around 20%, and around half. Katherine?
It's around 13%, depending on how you draw the line at what an astronaut is, have been women, which is improving. We had to check the stat again because just in the time since I was selected to be an astronaut, it's moved up from about 10 or 11%. And that's an issue I think most of us can agree with, not just because everyone deserves the chance to dream, not just because the best performant teams are diverse teams, but also because in space, because we're medical test subjects, unless there's more representation of women in space, the women on Earth don't get the full benefit of that health research.
Interestingly, it's exactly the same stat pretty much as the percentage of the engineering workforce that are women. It's just in the latest census data increased from 12% to 14%. So it's interesting that it's playing out in a similar way with astronauts. Okay, so we're going to finish our trivia with a couple of questions. And this time, if you think you know the answer, feel free to sort of yell it out, and then Katherine's going to tell us the right answer. Which planet in our solar system has the largest ocean? Does anyone know?
Just yell it.
Which planet? Which planet has the largest ocean? Might be Mars. Any other guesses? Oh, another guess up there. Neptune? Maybe Neptune, Katherine?
It's Jupiter.
Jupiter. There you go. I didn't even know Jupiter had oceans at all, let alone the largest ocean.
My favourite ocean after Earth, so, is the icy moons of Jupiter's oceans that may be under the crust.
Tell us why. Is it
There might be
beautiful?
life there. We're sending missions there now to start the process to look for life.
What's the name of
out
that ocean
there.
again, so people can look it up?
Oh, it's the planet, for example, Europa,
Right.
around Jupiter. There's 3 icy planets that are worth going to, and they have a beautiful dance of all the chemicals between them that give it all the ingredients for life.
If we Google that, will we see what you're talking about?
Absolutely.
Great.
It's wonderful.
Something to Google for later. Brilliant. All right. What is the coldest place in the universe? Does anyone know? What do you think?
I don't remember its name, but it's the farthest one from the sun.
Okay. All right. Well, could be that. One more, and then we'll ask Katherine. Pluto? It might be Pluto. What is the coldest place in the universe?
The coldest place in the universe is a place called the BEng Nebula, but the coldest place in the solar system, which is, all the bodies that orbit our sun, is actually not the furthest planets. It's the south polar regions, the permanently shadowed part of the moon around Earth. So when humans go there, who knows what we'll find in those places. Wonderful crystalline structures, I think.
Yeah, amazing. And last question, what colour is the hottest kind of star? Yell it out. Actually, it was the first answer over here, Katherine.
Yeah, blue. Well done, whoever said that.
There you go. I wouldn't have thought that blue is the colour of the hottest kind of star. Well, on that note, I'm happy to report that it's time for audience Q&A. So we have a couple of mics roaming around. There's one up the back there and another one on that side. So if we come down to this young girl with pigtails, we'll hear your question first.
What's your favourite kind of space food?
Oh, good question. Well, I think it's hard to know because up there your tastes change. Just like if you're a little bit sick on Earth, some things taste different. up in space you prefer salty and spicy foods because you can't taste as well. So I think Vegemite would taste pretty good up there, for example. But yeah, we got to try some space foods, and most of the time you're eating it like out of a pouch, like looks like the pouches that little kids have with a straw at the top, and you can plug that into a machine with hot or cold water that adds water to it, and you eat it with a spoon or a fork. Or it's something in a tin or pre-packaged, but yeah, nothing that makes crumbs.
Do you look forward to getting back to a restaurant after your training, or do they let you eat things during the training that are normal?
During the training it's normal, but at any moment we might have to do some serious gym work, so you have to be a bit careful.
Okay, where did the mic end up? All right, maybe down the front here, and then someone down here for the third question.
Hi, actually 2 questions to learn from you. The space discovery has been focusing on trying to find water because that kind of being deemed as a crucial resources for life. But what if there is life form not requiring any water to survive? So I don't get that part. Second question is about learning your personal life. Overall, I believe you're very driven, very determined, and very disciplined. But in real life, I'm sure that you are dealing with a lot of people, even maybe in your friends and family who are not, maybe living very casually. How do you strike that balance in terms of your emotions and mind when dealing with all these people who are not disciplined, not organized, and not driven? So,
for the first one, why do we look for water, if I understood that correctly, for life? I mean, the only life that we know it today is life that exists on Earth. So there's, lots of theories about life that is based on non-carbon life forms. But across the universe, where, by the way, there are about as many stars, we think, as grains of sand on all the beaches in all the world, which is similar to Avogadro's number, for anyone that studied that. So like 1 billion trillion, and the most abundant molecules are the higher up ones, the lighter ones in the periodic table. So carbon-based life forms have the most molecules available for life to form. And so we think that that's the easiest place to look for life first, because we'll be able to identify it comfortably. But there's still a lot of research going on into that field, astrobiology, of what life could look like. We think that looking for water will help us to find that kind of life, which we think is most likely. So whether that be on Mars, which is in the habitable zone and may have once had oceans on it, evidence points to that. There may be life still under the polar caps or subterranean, or evidence of that past life. We're looking outside the so-called habitable zone to the icy moons of Jupiter, because we think that the conditions from the tidal forces of Jupiter mean that all the liquid there, plus the ingredients of life, mean it could be there. And what I think is really interesting is that if we don't find life, then the likelihood there's life in the universe goes down a lot. If we do find life, it's either from the same tree of life as us, in which case, where did we come from? If it's from a different tree of life, life must be abundant. And all of that research is directly relevant to understanding how life on Earth adapts to quick changes in their environment, which is relevant for adaptation during climate change. So it's an interesting field. The second question, how am I patient with other people? I mean, I'm human, right? Everyone has strengths and weaknesses. One thing I do love, which I think grew out of really enjoying team sports when I was growing up, is building teams, finding something that unites people and building that and motivating people to achieve something. And it's good to have different types of personalities. That's how you round out the team. That's how you fill each other's strengths and weaknesses. In the astronaut selection, they were looking for people that are really team-oriented. They wanted to cut out extremes of personality. They're looking for people with a so-called optimism bias, glass half full rather than half empty, and all of those, and then they train you on that. And all of that means that we tend to be, as a group, quite tolerant of other personalities. It's just the way we are. But yeah, everyone has their moments.
Thank you, Katherine. I think a question over here.
So I know you did a lot of study and you had a lot of different doors of opportunity open for you. So it was probably a combination of lots of them, but what was the biggest or most significant one?
I think good question. Throughout my career, there's been a number of steps, as you indicated, that have really meant a lot for me. I think first of all was the realization I could pursue this career, which I've already talked about a little bit. The next was realizing that I would have to go overseas to pursue that path and getting that step to do that. So the way I knew that I could access a space career in Europe was because there was PhD students here at Sydney University that were exchange students that told me that I could have a space career in Europe without going through the level of security and visa challenges that you need to get to the US. And they connected me with educational opportunities over there. I was able to be a mentor on a Norwegian space camp. I went to the European Space Agency educational programs, a space station design workshop in Germany. All of these things are mostly open to Australians now, and that made me see a whole load of opportunities. And then I applied everywhere for postgrad courses internationally and got some of them, and then again entering the workforce. But a lot of those opportunities came about through personal connections to people I was exposed to through internships, through my career, through my extracurriculars. And in the workplace, the big leaps to exciting projects. So to get to work in human spaceflight for the first time, on developing a new part of the space station, on the Orion vehicle taking people back to the moon, that came through doing the extra projects. So when I was young, I met people in coffee breaks that were like, oh, I'm really busy. And it's like, well, let me help, I'll give me a go. And then I would be exposed to new opportunities like that. A big step for me was coming back to Australia. I never thought I'd have the chance to, do what I loved in this country. And I was so happy when the Australian Space Agency was set up. And then a year later, they hired me and a bunch of others home to help grow Australian space capability. And that moved me from not just working on a space component or a subsystem or a mission, but to being able to help build a whole sector. Like, I never even thought of that as an option for my career. And I don't think if I'd done that, I would have had all of the insights that I needed to pass astronaut selection, because we were asked a lot, like, why space? And when you're an emerging space nation, you have to think about that all the time. And when I was in a bubble overseas, I didn't have that introspection. So yeah, every step gives you something, even if you don't realise it at the time.
We can study in Australia now, or do we still have to go?
You don't have to leave Australia anymore to have a wonderful space career. You can if you want, because it's an international industry, but please come back, bring that knowledge back. And here at Sydney Uni, the degree I did still running, there are postgrad courses now across Australia specialising in space, and here as well. A lot of the people in our industry have never left Australia and are absolutely kicking goals. People in high school today are putting stuff on the International Space Station from Australia. I was in the workforce before anything I built ever went to space. So yeah, it's amazing.
Well, that's a great question. Thanks for asking that. We've only got time for 2 more questions, but Katherine will be outside for a little while at the top and to the left of the auditorium afterwards for photos and autographs. But we've got the mic with 2 more people, so we'll finish those. I think the first one is up there.
I've got 2 questions. So my first one is, did you vomit on the vomit comet? And my second one is, what was your greatest challenge that you faced, building up to being an astronaut?
Sure, so I did not vomit on the vomit comet. I've been very fortunate to have never been motion sick, but that doesn't mean that I won't be in space. Actually, Earth-based motion sickness only has a small overlap with space sickness. It's a different mechanism in the inner ear, it's thought. So sometimes astronauts that have never experienced it on Earth are affected the most in space because we don't know how to deal with it, and you actually have to you're advised to keep your head very still on your shoulders as you move around. In fact, none of my colleagues were sick on the vomit comet. We all did take motion sickness medication. I was on it once when I was an intern at NASA and I was fine without it, but we needed to test out different motion sickness medication on ourselves before we were to use it in space in case it made us too sleepy, for example. What was the biggest challenge I faced?
Besides learning Russian.
On the path to being an astronaut. I think the challenges for me and for a lot of the people around me is confidence in yourself, and that's harder at the beginning. When you start to get a few runs on the board, you can weather the knocks that you might hit better. So just know that it's not a linear best-worst, right? Sometimes when you're the least experienced, you bring the most value. And one thing I learned through that was to have the confidence to ask what might seem really basic questions if you don't understand. And that's especially important if you want to be a scientist or an engineer, because you need to make sure you understand to be able to progress and so you don't make mistakes. So that would be advice to anyone that's younger. Don't be afraid of asking what might seem like a silly question. If you don't understand it yet, it's not silly to try and understand it.
Great response. And our last question.
Yeah, I'm sure this gets said endlessly, but you're a massive inspiration for me and I think most people in this room. As well, I'm on the UCID rocketry team and I understand you're in the UCID Rocketry Society back in the day, so thank you for planting that seed. I just wanted to ask, with the space sector, there's obviously like a lot of international collaboration, and I just wanted to know, what is it like fostering those collaborations with people that may speak different languages and people from all over the place? And also, what's the best way to commence a career internationally, in your opinion?
Thank you, first of all, for your kind words there. Yeah, I was part of the small group that set up the precursor to the Sydney Uni Rocket Society, although you have far surpassed our capabilities. I remember we were packing the little solid fuel motors and getting checks from security about what we were doing with fuel there. But now you're, kicking goals on the world stage with that, so well done. To crack in internationally, it's easiest when you're young. Where it's a challenge is when you're in this surge of recent graduates, when you're in the first 3 years out of uni, that's when there's probably more people that want the jobs than might be available on the world stage. But where there's opportunity is internships. Like, apply everywhere. Like, internationally, I'd probably say Germany is a great place for Australians to do internships because of the visa conditions and because their educational approach requires a lot of internships. You can just cold email people. Go to conferences if you can. Apply for student opportunities. There's a number now in Australia. And then the people you meet, keep up those relationships and don't be afraid of shooting your CV to anyone that's doing anything interesting that you might like. But in Australia, there's a lot of great stuff too. So my advice for young people in Australia is not to wait for a job to be advertised. Look what organisations, whether they're institutes or companies, are getting projects. Look who wins the Stage 2 Lunar Rover program for the moon. There's 2 consortiums vying for it, tens of companies in each and institutes in each, and they're making a rover. Whoever gets his contract is going to build a rover that's going to be on the South Polar region of the moon within the decade. Like, shoot them your CV. They're going to need space. They're going to need people, and you need people in all stages of experience. And a lot of recent graduates now are absolutely kicking goals on the world stage through those opportunities in Moon to Mars program and others.
Brilliant. Thank you for that question. Well, unfortunately, we've run out of time, but as I said, Katherine will be outside for a few minutes afterwards. Just before we thank Katherine, I've got a couple of quick housekeeping notes. Firstly, to let you know that the Road to Net Zero with Craig Rucastle and Professor D'Alessandro is in this room next at 5:15. They're hoping that everyone can leave the room so that they can reset it, please. And then, of course, if you can stay around for carols at 6:20 on the lawns and fireworks at 8:15, that would be fantastic as well. This time has gone incredibly quickly. What a treat it has been to be able to spend this hour with Katherine. Thank you so much for travelling to Sydney and sharing your time, your passion, your insights, and your inspiring journey. We are all very proud to have you as an Aussie, and we can't wait to see where your career as an astronaut takes you next. Will you please join me in thanking the amazing Katherine Bennell-Pegg.
I like to say thanks also to Jane, who's a massive inspiration for me, having been, Chief Engineer of Engineers Australia. What a role model. And also to all of you for coming. And it was wonderful recently to come back and to see some of my lecturers again and the staff here. I arrived, as I said here, as someone that had never used a drill or written a line of code, didn't really know what engineering was, but with stars in my eyes, just hoping one day to have the chance to work on a space mission. And here we are. So yeah, very special to be back, and thanks to everyone.
Thanks for coming. We hope to see you outside.